My name is Barry Honan. Since 1987, I've made a study of rugby at all levels, from schoolboy through to international, and in doing so I've covered some 280 games, looking at patterns of play. Ian Smith is a former rugby player from the GPS club in Brisbane. Ian has performed a similar analysis of games over the same period at both international and Super Rugby level. The presentation that follows combines my analysis with that of Ian's, together with the thoughts of some highly regarded former players who have coached at the highest levels. I'm speaking of David Clark, Dick Marks, Greg Cornelson, Andrew Slack and Rod McQueen. The presentation is an attempt to show clearly what the majority of rugby supporters already know. That is, if the game is to survive in Australia, then a drastic overhaul in rugby laws must be undertaken. Sure, there are, and always will be, problems at administration level with the game in Australia. But the best administrators in the world will struggle if the product they're trying to promote has too many deficiencies.
Rugby in Australia certainly does have its problems. Game crowds are down, TV audiences also. The space devoted to rugby in major newspapers is down. Teams of traditional rugby schools, the numbers are down. The number of schools opting to play rugby is also down. And the average unbiased viewer, just wanting to watch some footy of some sort, would rather watch rugby league, Aussie football or even soccer. Games administrators seem to be turning a blind eye to the product's problems. The game should be and could be much better. I've never seen so many people, supporters of rugby, disillusioned with the game at professional level. This is not necessarily the same at junior school or even club level, but certainly at professional level, the problems are noticed more. And broadly, the fault lies with the laws of the game, and more specifically to those relating to match time, wastage, time off periods and replacements, the sheer number of infringements, confusing and often subjective interpretations of the law by match officials. The penalty is a sanction, I'll say more about that later, and its effect on point scoring. Those 3 points there are directly related to the game's laws. All the other points are as well, but not as directly as those three. The scrum, the rolling maul, has always been is a problem, and arguably the greatest problem, as I see it in the game, is the fact that we have a 0 metre defence line at the breakdown. If we look at the game's charter now, the game's charter reads, the object of the game is the two teams, each of 15 players, observing fair play and according to the laws that in a sporting spirit should, by carrying, passing, kicking and grounding the ball, score as many points as possible. Now, when it mentions kicking, it doesn't say kicking for points. It means kicking and regathering or kicking for territory, and certainly there is no mention of pushing for points. And this translates into the object being to score tries. Scoring of tries. Let's look for a moment at some Rugby World Cup playoff matches. I say playoff matches because in pool matches sometimes the games are very one-sided, and of course teams trying to get to the playoffs want to score as many points as possible because sometimes it comes down to points for and against. But if you look at South African matches now, South Africa is the second team mentioned here. In those 7 games that South Africa played, from finals, quarterfinals and semi-finals, notice they averaged, this is the tries they've scored, and it's the second team here. So South Africa have averaged 1 try, and they've kept their opposition to less than a fifth, less than 1/5 of a try per game, which says a huge amount about the South Africa's defence, which will also be mentioned a bit later. And the points scored, on average, South Africa scored 24.3 points, the opposition's 12.6. But a statistic that I'll be referring to quite frequently throughout this presentation, is the statistic which talks about the ratio of the points from tries to the total number of points scored. And in this case, that ratio is 15.5%. Now, if we look at New Zealand's matches, there are 8 matches here over World Cups from 1987 right through to 2019. Their ratio of tries to total points scored is 56.6, far in excess of that in matches involving South Africa. This is not New Zealand, this is the total matches. South Africa's average, New Zealand's average in actual fact, tries to points scored is 61, their opposition is 48. The average for the matches, though, is 56.6. If you look at Australian matches over a number of World Cups, starting from 1987 through to 2019, the average in those matches was 39.8. Australia was 45% of points from tries compared to total points, and the opposition was 35. An interesting point there, I suppose, is that even though, I'll come back to this. There's a comment I'd like to make on that a little bit later. If you look at Rugby World Cup finals, right from 1987 right through to 2009, these are the grand finals now, not just the playoff finals, this is the lot. In all those finals, the ratio of tries, points from tries to total points is 30%. Which is a bit of an indictment, I believe, on the way the game is played, particularly in tight matches like not just World Cup finals, but in fact club finals, school finals. You have a similar sort of result. In the very final game of in 2019 between South Africa and England, Pollard kicked 2 conversions and 6 penalty goals. So 32 of the points South Africa scored, 22 of them came from goal kicking. Of the 12 points that England scored, all 12 points came from penalty goals. So in that particular game, of course, the ratio of tries to points was extremely bad. In fact, it was 23%. And that was the pinnacle, if you like, of rugby in 2019. Have tries dominated point scoring? Well, if we look at Australia's test matches, starting right back in 1991, going through to 2019 now, there are 34 matches here analysed. And the ratio of tries, points scored from tries to total points in all those games was 43.5. Again, well less than 50%. If you wanted to know how Australia did in those matches, Australia in fact won 14 of those 35 games, not 34. Rugby has never been a simple game. It can't be a simple game when there are so many laws determining how the game has to be played, basically. But it can be played very simply, and South Africa have proved that. They've won 3 Rugby World Cups now, and they've won it by using very simple strategies. They play the game in their opposition half. Most teams do that in actual fact because they're scared of penalties being awarded against them and suffering points against them by penalty goals. They dominate set plays and rolling mauls. They can do that. They have a plethora of huge men in South Africa, plenty of steak eating done in that country, and they seem to have just an unlimited supply of tight forwards. They prioritise defence over attack, which they're very, very good at, and they select the champion goal kicker. And in fact, over the years, South Africa has proved to have probably the best goal kicking record in world rugby. Yes, there was a comment made by Aaron Goyle, or written comment, in a rugby article in New Zealand prior to the 2019 Rugby World Cup. He said that dazzling attacks make the highlight reels, but stoic defences win championships. It's an age-old theory, he continued, but one that may prove no more accurate than at this year's World Cup, where work without the ball looks set to be absolutely critical on the path to triumph. And he continued, with rush defences becoming in vogue in recent years and offences getting swarmed and still adjusting in their search for points, keeping your line intact and kicking your penalty goals will be an obvious blueprint for success this year, particularly in the knockout phases. It's well worthwhile having a look at this video of a match between the Crusaders and the Reds played in early 2020. The video is about 2 or 3 minutes long, but it's really well worth watching for a very important point that I have been making and will continue to make.
About 3 metres. Why risk this? That's Crusaders competing, the line out, everything else. I'll prove me wrong and win it, but it is risky, I think.
Right wins the line out, so here's the opportunity. The 2 loose forwards close together in midfield. Ball freed up. Lucas Put on the ground by Morga. Spate now. Just the sort of player who could break them open. Crusaders come up on defence. McWright, who's been impressive, trying to rip it off him was Barrett. Can't do so. Numbers away to the left. Oh, big punishing.
The play continues for quite a few more phases, as you can see, but the attack is going absolutely nowhere. The Reds here, with only, look, it's already an extra time. They need a try. They're trying to run the ball from their own quarter, but all the possessions are coming from the breakdown. And just trying to break the defence line in this sort of a situation becomes almost impossible against a well-organised team like the Crusaders.
Accurate with their defence, but the ball's still there. Dangunu, well, they're aware of the threat that he and Spate represents. Lucas now, Tupou smothering defence on him, led by Luke. Romano, they've gone back inside their 22 now. Blythe, he's put on the deck. Oh, look at this swarming defence by the Crusaders, driving the Reds back towards their own goal line. Tupou trying to crash through. Oh, I've got players over the ball here. Well, initially they did, but it's there for the Reds. Dangunu, they're still just one line break away from it here, the Reds. They've just got to hang on to the ball. Tupou is smothered. Now the big wide pass, and Campbell's out there. But it's been ripped up on. Oh, Seven Reese.
Thankfully, at the end there, that try was disallowed in Queensland. The Reds were able to get a bonus point from that game. Mentioned before, the greatest impact on the game, or the law change that had the greatest impact on the game, happened back in 1996, where the use it or lose it law was introduced. Prior to that, there were lots and lots of mauls in the game. I don't mean rolling mauls, very few of them, but just normal mauls where a player caught in possession with the ball on his feet were joined by players from either side. And it was, I suppose it was a pushing contest then as well. But the team driving forward, if the ball wasn't released and a team couldn't get possession from that maul, the scrum that was awarded to the team driving forward. Now that meant that people used to commit to those ruck and mauls, particularly the forwards back in those days, where by driving forward you'd get the scrum, and there were a lot more scrums in the game as a result. And as we'll see later, that was a good part of the game, not detrimental to the game like scrums have become. Prior to 1996, over 35 games analysed. This is on average the number of lineouts, scrums, breakdowns, successful attacks, etc. And only international provincial level matches were analysed. After 1996, in the period 99 to 2002, there were 64 games, and I've given a couple of years for teams to adjust to that change in the laws. And then after 2014, there were 12 matches analysed randomly at those levels. Lineouts, for example, went from 33 on average in that era to 26 to 21. Scrums went from 27, 20 to 10. But the big thing, and the point I'd like to make here, was that, look, the breakdowns, ruck maul tackles as we call them now, the breakdowns, there were 49 on average in that era prior to 1996. That went to 105 during that era, and then now it went up to 163 from 2014. And in fact, if you just looked at 2019 and Rugby World Cup matches, it's higher than that. The graph here just simply shows what's happened in a graphical sense to breakdowns over those eras. Now, a statistic or a parameter that I'll be using quite a bit in the presentation is this thing that compares, or is a ratio rather, of the number of breakdowns in a game to the total number of, possessions from breakdowns to the total number of possessions. And those possessions come from line-out and scrums and the breakdowns. I've left out tap penalty possessions here because, in fact, there are very few tap penalties taken in the modern game anyway, and certainly tap penalties that result in some running rugby. Sometimes the ball might be tapped and kicked downfield, but very few times do you see now any very interesting tap plays that you saw in years gone by. And if you look at the stats from 2014 over here again, if you add up the scrums and lineouts and the breakdowns, that they total up in this case 194, and there were 163 just breakdowns. So the ratio of breakdowns to total possessions it turns out to be 0.84, which is a percentage, of course, is 84%. Now that same calculation, if you go back to 1996, doing the same calculation here, there were 49 breakdown possessions and the total number of possessions here, which gives you a ratio of 0.45 or 45%. So the ratio of breakdown possessions to total possessions has nearly doubled since 1996. Let's look now at some international matches. I've shown here 4 matches involving Australia. The first 2 Rugby World Cup final matches. Remember, where Australia actually won the World Cup in 99 and 2015. And these were the last 2 games they played in Japan during the 2019 Rugby World Cup. A correction there, Australia won the World Cup in 1991. They contested in 95 against New Zealand. If you look now, the game featured here is the World Cup final between Australia and New Zealand. And in that particular game, Australia had 3 loose head possessions or scrum possessions, 5 line-out possessions, and 72 from ruck and maul. The ratio of breakdowns to breakdown possessions to total possessions in that game to Australia was 90%. A huge difference. And if you add these up, 8 and 3 possessions from set plays, 5 and 3, that's 8, which is 1/9 the number that they receive from breakdowns. If you look at all 4 Rugby World Cup matches together and look at the actual matches, not just Australia's performance, the average number of possessions from breakdown to total possessions was 86, once again close to 90%. This particular game, this highlights the number of possessions by the first team here, which is Australia. Australia had 126 breakdown possessions in this game, compared to 15, compared to 19 possessions from set play. A huge discrepancy in where their possessions are gained from. The couple more games. These are games featuring test matches featuring New Zealand. One is a World Cup match in 2019. The other one here was when Ireland defeated New Zealand, remember, at Lansdowne Road in 2018. Fantastic match, and we were all thrilled that New Zealand was finally beaten by somebody. But on further analysis of the match, it was quite a boring match. And one of the statistics that really shone from this match was, once again, that the vast majority of possessions, in fact, have a look here, possessions 110 to New Zealand and 108 to Ireland, meant that there was 218 possessions from that breakdown, from which nobody was going terribly far, compared to, you add these up now, the 12 and 20, 32 possessions from set plays. That record, that number here of 218 ruck and maul possessions was a record. There was a total of 227, but some didn't result in possessions. That is the greatest number of breakdown possessions I've recorded in all provincial and international matches analysed since 1987. The decrease in set play possessions, together with the enormous increase in breakdown possessions, following the introduction of the use it or lose it law, has given rise to the greatest change in the shape of rugby, I believe, over the last 30 years. We're now going to look at the breakdown in detail and what I believe is a solution to the problem that we have. And we'll come back to this picture a little bit later. More than ever before, defence rules over attack in the modern game. These percentages here, there's no need to go into that. You've seen a similar graph earlier. But the 2 pictures here point something out. It shows the problem you have trying to attack when you've got that sort of a defensive line at 0 metres and usually with a couple offside. The other problem, of course, is when it takes more players, or every time there is a breakdown, you'll find that there's more players in the attacking team involved in the breakdown than there is defending it. So the defensive numbers also outnumber those in attack. And if you look at the situation where teams have, for example, from scrum, where, you know, a well-organised team, this is a fantastic opportunity for a team to mount some sort of an attack involving some sort of a multi-pass play. And recall, in years past, teams used to spend, probably backs used to spend 90% of their time at training, practicing all their set plays from situations exactly like this. And lineouts, yeah, by the way, why Australia is back 10 metres almost from that scrum is beyond me, but that's beside the point. From lineouts, again, look here, the French team has that advantage of 20 metres between the defensive and the attack line, should they choose to spin the ball.
Let's look now at the set-piece tries. In fact, tries scored over the last 4 Rugby World Cups. Actually, it's not the last 4. 2019 statistics aren't shown, but World Cups from 2003 through to 2015. And notice there are 29 tries scored from scrum 2003, and that basically halved the number of tries from a scrum in 2015. From a line-out, it operates, of course, with a 10-metre defence line. And nearly 90% of the time, the team with the throw-in wins the contest. So the line-out then provides a wonderful attacking opportunity for all sorts of set pieces, as shown in the graph. However, what the graph does not show is that the vast majority of these tries scored from line-out were actually directly from rolling mauls, or soon after from power drives near the goal line. The 2019 stats show that on average a hooker scored 2.5 times more tries than a centre. In the first Rugby World Cup, on average, a centre in fact scored 1.7, nearly 2 times more tries than a hooker. Looking at that little picture there again of a classic rolling maul, the rolling maul opposite resulted in a try by Fainga, the number 2 for the Brumbies. In 2019 Super Rugby, Fainga scored 12 tries, all but 1 were from rolling mauls. He was his team's top try scorer. The Brumbies here actually should have been penalised for obstruction, and we'll have a look at that later.
To make things more difficult for teams to attack from a breakdown is that more often than not, there will be players offside in the defensive line. This is just a selection of probably about 40 photographs or pictures I took of teams offside during Rugby World matches at the breakdown. To make it even worse, the players involved at the breakdown in winning the ball, that we've mentioned I think before, vastly outnumber the players at the breakdown defending the thing. But in fact, half the time after the tackle is made, the defender will jump to his feet and not even be part of this thing that rugby is now calling a ruck. And I'm not sure why, because there is no opposition player there. But the laws have been amended recently to call this thing a ruck as well. But notice here that Ireland has 7 players involved at the breakdown, and the Blacks have none, meaning the Kiwis have 15 players to defend against 8. No wonder we see so much box kicking. The same thing here, where Wales has 7 players involved at the breakdown, and once again a huge disadvantage in trying to mount some sort of an attack. Can it get worse? Well, it certainly can. Teams have now learnt the advantage of rush-up defences.
Trying to get it wide. Bigger again. Quick hands and...
Okay, let's just analyse this thing in a little bit more detail. First of all, defence lines, I've measured this on a zillion occasions, but defence lines on average will move up between 3 to 5.5 metres per second. So, and 4.5 is about an average, but I'm going to say it's 5 just because it's easy to make calculations. But if we once again have a look at this video, you'll see that Gareth Davis, the Welsh scrum half, takes, well, I've measured it as 0.53 seconds to make the pass. That's from the moment he begins his pass till the ball is released. And that, by the way, is faster than average, but and much faster than Will Genia, who passes the ball on average, very slowly. Let's just quickly have a look at that footage again, though.
Just trying to get it wide.
And if we look at the point where, now here we are, this is where Davis touches the ball. He's now beginning his pass. So that breakdown is over. There's no offside line now. The defending players can advance. And if you look what happens, it actually takes 2 point, I'll tell you in a moment, but let's look where that tackle is made again. Everybody thought here for a moment that French defender was offside. But in fact, look, once again, having a look, if we can go back, I'll see if I can keep this steady. Go back to where he touches, there. Whoops, let's go back. So from about this point here, I'm having a bit of difficulty here. From here to where, look, where it is the blue player, the French player on the outside, that makes up probably around about 10 to 11 metres and makes the tackle. Okay, and we'll just play that through. And if you look at that again, in fact, it took 2.3 seconds from the instant Davis starts his pass to the instant the Wales centre received it. And in the meantime, the French winger rushes up with an average, let's say, of 5 metres per second. So, in 2.3 seconds running up at 5 metres per second, you can cover 10 to 11 metres, which he did very, very comfortably, making it extremely difficult for any team trying to make a couple of passes to get over the gain line if there's a rush-up defence. Can it get worse? Well, unfortunately,
Full D match, and so the Wallabies, with 2.5 remaining in the first half, have possession, and now it's been intercepted. He did it earlier in the match, and now Gareth Davis is going to go all the way. Second intercept. This one results in 5 valuable points.
Who will ever forget that try that came at a crucial time in that quarter-final between Wales and Australia? The point is Wales were really aware of the tendency for Jenny to take a step when he passes, and his delivery is quite slow anyway, compared to other international scrum halves on average. Now, and that's particularly the case if Australia used the ploy of Genia having the option of passing to either the first receiver or a second receiver standing quite flat. Now, if you pass to the second receiver, then obviously the ball's in flight longer, so it's going to take longer to get there. Because it's a longer pass, Genia will take a bit longer to wind up and pass it. So in fact, in that particular pass that was made, Genia took 0.87 seconds to make the pass, which is a long time. And the pass to intercept happened in 1.53 seconds. Now, initially thought Webb was offside, but in fact, if you look at this video once again and see and analyse it, in fact, he wasn't. Look, this is the point now where Genia, look here, watch carefully. He begins his pass now. He's begun his pass, and we can't see any Welsh players offside there. In the 0.583 seconds it took to make the pass, that's 0.83 of a seconds. Look where Davis has now moved to in his line of defence. So he certainly was onside when Genia began his pass. And of course, we've seen the result, and we don't really need to look at it again. Interestingly, though, also later in the game, there was almost an identical scenario where the Welsh halfback did exactly the same thing, and unfortunately for him, but fortunately for Australia, he spilt the pass. The problem, I think the point has been made, there is a problem with the breakdown with the defence line where it is. And the scenario opposite shows it quite clearly. When I go to the next slide, notice what I've done to the defence line by using a bit of Photoshop and also to the attack line. Moving on to this next slide, the first thing you'll see is, well, let's see if we can see it, is I've moved the play, well, I've defined what we call a breakdown zone. Now, the breakdown zone is the zone 5 metres either side of where the breakdown's occurring. Now, within that 5 metre either side, that breakdown zone, according to this solution, inverted commas, to the problem with the defence line of breakdown, you can have as many players in that region as you like. It doesn't matter how many. But outside that 5 metre zone, either side, players must be back minimum of 5 metres. So I've shifted those players who were here before back 5 metres, okay, in accordance with that variation. What I've also done, these players that are attack have also moved forward some 2 metres. The reason I've done that is if they're going to be back, and the whole idea is to get over the gain line, then by standing fairly flat and moving up, you have a greater chance now of getting to the gain line and possibly over the gain line now that we've employed this new idea of a 5 metre defence line from ruck and maul. Should the attacking team now choose to move the ball wide, they have the option of adopting a shallow alignment. Players outside the 5 metre line, 5 metre ruck and maul zone, the breakdown zone, have to be positioned as I've said. A couple more things about that. There we are. I've mentioned that. A defending player wishing to enter the breakdown zone, whether or not wanting to join the breakdown, must do so from behind the breakdown zone. That's pretty much the same as what happens now with current law, with players having to come in through the gate to join a breakdown. The whole idea of this, of allowing players to be where they were initially with a 0 metre defence line, as the old law had, is to try to prevent teams from just constantly pick and driving or one pass hit-ups. It's not going to stop that, but at least now it gives an opportunity, a better opportunity for an attacking team to choose a play that involves more than one pass. There's a point here about line-outs, but I'm going to leave that because I'll be mentioning it later when we actually continue on with suggesting other variations to the game. For quick possession at a breakdown, like sometimes the ball's been kicked downfield and a breakdown occurs and defenders and attackers are moving to the breakdown spot, then a defender not part of the breakdown must be attempting to move back to the 5 metre defence line and is regarded as offside should he or she intentionally interfere with an attacking player before becoming onside. That's the same as existing law, except now where they only have to get behind the last feet. If you're outside that breakdown zone, you've got to be back 5 metres. Now, I return to that photograph that we had before in the match between Australia and England. That was the scenario during the game. And if you look at the score, it was 0-0 at the time, only 2 minutes into the game. But this was always, Australia was up to the 17th phase. So they were there after 17 phases. I've forgotten how far they'd made in 17 phases, but it probably wasn't a lot. That's how it is. This is how I'd like things to be. Notice here, once again, there's a whole heap of defenders in that 5 metre defensive zone to try to discourage teams from doing this. It won't stop them, but look at the advantage you have if you went wide to the blind side or to the open side. That's how it could be.